The war was lost. It had been lost for months now, though no one dared to say it aloud. Not in the war councils, not in the trenches, not even in the whispered prayers of the dying. The ex-Scifi Empire had made sure of that, crushing every last defense, razing entire colonies, and breaking the coalition forces with terrifying efficiency. Now, the united coalition of sentient species huddled on the last stronghold, Invaders, a barren rock that had once been dismissed as strategically insignificant. There was nowhere else to run. The few surviving fleets were crippled, stranded across dying systems, their commanders forced into desperation. On the surface, a dwindling army prepared for its final stand. General Voss, a veteran of too many wars, surveyed the war map with empty eyes. He had fought on 100 worlds, held the line against insurmountable odds, but he had never felt this kind of inevitability. The ex-Scifi fleet had encircled the planet, their warships forming an unbroken ring of impending death. In the command bunker beneath the surface, the coalition leaders bickered over contingency plans that no longer mattered. Surrender was not an option. The ex-Scifi had made that clear when they erased the entire population of Drathis 4. Kalen had stopped listening hours ago. Then, something impossible happened. A new fleet dropped out of FTL. At first, the command center braced for another wave of ex-Scifi reinforcements, but the tactical screens lit up with unknown transponders. No identification. No insignia. Just cold, silent warships emerging from the void like specters. Their hulls were matte black, scarred with ancient battle wounds. Their formations too precise, too methodical, too inhuman. The coalition officers scrambled, calling for scans, hailing the newcomers on every frequency, demanding to know who they were. One message came through. Audio only. "We are the Revenants." The name meant nothing. The voice was human, cold, measured. A woman's voice, precise as a scalpel. Kalen's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. Then the Revenants attacked. They did not move like a rescue fleet. They moved like executioners. Their ships slipped through the ex-Scifi formation without warning, their weapons cutting through shields with terrifying efficiency. The ex-Scifi fleet, which had outmatched the coalition for years, suddenly found itself prey. Inside the bunker, stunned silence filled the air. No one cheered. There was no room for it. The Revenants did not coordinate with the coalition forces. They did not send orders. They fought alone, and they were winning. Minutes passed like lifetimes. The holodisplays showed ex-Scifi warships crumbling, escape pods ignored, disabled vessels left adrift. The Revenants did not take prisoners. Kalen was still trying to process what he was witnessing when the second transmission arrived. This time it was visual. The display flickered, and a figure materialized. A woman in black combat armor, her features sharp, angular, as if carved from stone. Her eyes were devoid of warmth, calculating but not cruel. Just empty. "I am General Adrian Wolf," she said. "You are not in command here. The war was lost before we arrived. We will win it for you. Stay out of our way." The transmission cut before anyone could respond. It took 3 seconds before chaos erupted. The coalition leaders shouted over one another, arguing about whether this was an ally or a new enemy. But Kalen remained quiet. He had fought alongside humans before. He had seen their resilience, their ingenuity. But these humans, these Revenants, were something else entirely. There was no desperation in their tactics, no hesitation, no fear. Hours later, the last ex-Scifi ship burned in orbit. Not a single one had escaped. The battlefield fell eerily silent. No triumphant broadcasts, no celebrations, no relief. Just the stark reality that the Revenants had turned the tide in a single night. A storm of dropships descended toward the surface, kicking up clouds of dust and ash. The coalition soldiers stood in uneasy silence as the Revenants emerged. Their armor was different, scarred, reinforced. built for endurance rather than aesthetics. They carried weapons the coalition had never seen before, brutal and efficient, designed for one purpose. They walked like predators. General Wolf was the last to step forward. She surveyed the gathered coalition officers with mild interest, then spoke without ceremony. "The Xyvari are not the enemy anymore," she said. "They are prey. We will hunt them down until nothing remains. If you cannot stomach what comes next, leave. If you get in our way, we will remove you." No one dared to argue. Kalen met her gaze, searching for something: humanity, remorse, anything. He found nothing, and that terrified him more than the Xyvari ever had. The first strike came at dawn. The Revenants did not issue warnings, nor did they wait for the coalition forces to regroup. Before the first light touched the ruined landscape of Vadres, they had already deployed. Their methods defied everything the coalition had ever known of warfare. There were no mass charges, no grand fleet movements, no coordinated bombardments. Instead, the Revenants struck like a phantom plague, severing command links, cutting supply chains, and isolating entire divisions of Xyvari forces before erasing them with brutal precision. The coalition officers struggled to comprehend the sheer efficiency of it. Reports streamed in from the front lines, enemy outposts reduced to silent graveyards, entire platoons of Xyvari found dead without a single alarm being raised. Some bodies bore the telltale scars of plasma fire. Others showed no wounds at all. Kalen Voss watched it unfold from the war room, standing amidst a gathering of stunned generals and admirals. Every screen displayed the same grim reality. The Revenants were not fighting a war. They were conducting an extermination. No one spoke until a young officer, his voice trembling, finally broke the silence. "This isn't how we fight." No, Kalen thought. It wasn't. The Revenants did not engage in prolonged battles. They made examples. The first major counteroffensive from the Xyvari lasted less than an hour. Their warships, reinforced by what should have been overwhelming numbers, were reduced to debris fields before they even managed to fire a full volley. Their ground forces fared no better. Any unit that attempted to dig and found itself surrounded by shadows, ambushed from angles they could not predict, their soldiers butchered before they even realized they were under attack. And then there were the broadcasts. At first, the Xyvari attempted to rally their forces with their traditional war cries, sending out guttural howls meant to intimidate their enemies. But something changed. The howls were intercepted, distorted, then rebroadcasted through the very same channels, only now they were filled with something else. Something inhuman. The wails of their own dying commanders, layered beneath the battle hymns, twisting into a symphony of terror. The Revenants did not just kill. They unmade the enemy from within. Kalen found himself in yet another war council, listening to the same arguments as before, only now the fear in the room was tangible. The coalition leaders were no longer discussing victory. They were questioning the cost of it. "We cannot condone this," Admiral Redhis snapped, his reptilian features rigid with fury. "This is not war, this is survival," Wolf interrupted. The Revenant general stood at the head of the room, arms crossed, face unreadable. She had barely spoken since landing on Vadres, but when she did, her voice left no room for argument. "You've spent years dying on your feet," she continued, tone cold. "You tried honor. You tried mercy. And it brought you here, one step from extinction." The room remained silent. No one dared to meet her gaze. "We don't fight like you," Wolf continued. "We don't give speeches, we don't take prisoners, and we don't let our enemies regroup. The Xyvari have never known fear. We are teaching them." Kalen watched as the words settled over the room like a suffocating fog. "They are retreating," Wolf said, as if stating an inevitable fact. "For the first time in this war, they are breaking. You want to stop us? Fine. Do it. But when they return, and they will, you'll be right back where you started." She let the silence hang for a long moment before turning toward the exit. Kalen found himself moving before he even realized it, following her into the corridor. She did not acknowledge his presence at first, only walking with the same measured pace she always did. But when she finally stopped, she regarded him with the same cold neutrality she reserved for everything. "You have questions?" He did. More than he could count. But only one truly mattered. What happens when the war is over? Wolf studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and for the first time, Kalen felt something far worse than fear. Then we find the next one. The war ended in silence. Not in celebration. Not in the thunderous cries of victory. Just silence. The Scifi did not surrender. They did not gather their fleets for a final, desperate stand. They simply ceased to be a military force. The transmission stopped. Their war machines abandoned. Their strongholds, once thought impenetrable, reduced to smoldering ruins. Entire battalions vanished without a trace, and those who remained alive fled to the deepest corners of space, choosing exile over confrontation. The Revenants had done what no other force in the galaxy had accomplished. They had broken an empire, but there was no relief in it. Kalen Voss stood in the remains of what had once been the Scifi Command Center, a fortress city carved into the mountains of Carvos Prime. What was left of it burned in eerie silence, the air thick with the acrid stench of scorched metal and something worse. The coalition forces had been allowed entry only after the battle was over, after the Revenants had completed their work. What they found defied explanation. There were no bodies, no prisoners, just the aftermath of something precise and merciless. The few survivors they had captured, low-ranking officers and scattered infantry who had been too slow to run, refused to speak. Some trembled at the sight of their captors, but others simply stared into nothingness, hollow and unresponsive. The Scifi had always been fearless. They had slaughtered entire species without hesitation. But now they had become something else. Something Kalen had never imagined possible. Prey. He found General Wolf standing on the edge of the ruined command deck, staring into the burning horizon. She did not turn when he approached, nor did she acknowledge him at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, devoid of the edge it usually carried. "It's over?" He wasn't sure if it was a question or a statement. He wasn't sure if she was even speaking to him. He stepped forward, studying her. She looked the same as always, armor scuffed, posture rigid, eyes unreadable. But there was something beneath it now. A quiet certainty. "You did it," he said. She nodded, as if the fact was irrelevant. Kalen exhaled, running a hand through his graying hair. "The Scifi are finished. What happens now?" For the first time, Wolf turned to face him. There was no hesitation in her answer. "We leave." That was it. No further explanation, no parting words. Just the inevitability of departure. "The coalition needs time to recover," he said carefully. "Your forces, your tactics, are not for the coalition." He frowned. "You saved us. We did what was necessary." The words were spoken without pride or regret. Just fact. And that was what disturbed him most. The Revenants had not fought for glory. They had not fought for alliances or honor. They had fought because the war needed to be won. And now that it was over, they were already looking elsewhere. Kalen glanced past her, watching as Revenant soldiers moved with quiet efficiency, already preparing for departure. No celebrations. No lingering attachments. Just another battlefield to leave behind. He had fought beside humans before. He had admired them for their tenacity, their ability to endure. But these humans were different. They did not endure. They conquered. And when there was nothing left to conquer, they moved on. "You never intended to stay," he said. Wolf's gaze was steady. "There's always another war." Something about those words made the air feel colder. Kalen watched as the Revenant ships ascended into the sky, dark phantoms against the dying light. Within hours, they would be gone, their purpose fulfilled, their presence reduced to whispers and rumors. The war was over. But what had they unleashed? The message arrived 3 months after the war ended. It was not sent through official channels. No encrypted coalition networks, no diplomatic envoys. Just a simple transmission, buried in the static of deep space, waiting to be found. Kalen Voss recognized the frequency the moment it crossed his desk. He read the message once. Then again. Coordinates. No explanation. No sender identification. But he didn't need one. The revenants were calling. The coalition had spent the past months rebuilding, trying to reclaim what had been lost. Cities were being reconstructed, fleets repaired. Refugees returned to whatever homes remained. Yet beneath the surface, the galaxy had changed. The Xyvari were gone, but their absence had not brought peace, only uncertainty. The power vacuum left in their wake was vast, and already, whispers of warlords, opportunists, and old enemies resurfacing had begun to spread. And then there were the revenants. They had vanished without a trace after Carvos Prime, slipping into the void as if they had never existed. No bases, no territories, no demands. Just silence. Until now, Kalen made his decision before he even realized it. He took a single ship, no escorts, no official sanction. He told himself it was curiosity, that he needed to understand. That was a lie. The coordinates led him to the edges of known space, where the stars were thin, and the void stretched endlessly. A single revenant dreadnought loomed in the darkness, waiting. It dwarfed his vessel, its black hull absorbing the faint starlight, its presence an unspoken warning. They let him dock without a word. The interior of the ship was as silent as the grave. No honor guards, no welcoming committee, just cold steel corridors, unmarked and utilitarian. The revenants did not waste space on aesthetics. He found Wolf in what passed for a command chamber. She stood alone, studying a vast star map. Dozens of systems were marked, some in coalition space, some beyond. Some he didn't recognize at all. She looked up when he entered. "You came?" Kalen folded his arms. "You sent for me. I sent a message. You chose to answer it." He exhaled slowly. "Why am I here?" Wolf gestured to the map. "Because this war isn't over." He stared at the mark systems, his gut tightening. "The Xyvari are finished. They were one threat." She tapped a system on the outer rim. "There are others." He recognized the name. A warlord had seized control of it, rallying remnants of the Xyvari fleet under his banner. Reports had been vague, but the coalition had assumed it would take years for them to become a true danger. Wolf knew better. She moved her hand across the map, highlighting another sector. Then another, and another. This is what happens when an empire falls. The scavengers move in. You think the coalition has time to rebuild? It won't get the chance. Kalen felt the weight of her words settle over him. "You want another war? I want to end it before it begins." Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes now, a quiet certainty, a knowledge he didn't yet possess. She stepped closer. "You fought for survival. You fought because you had no choice. We fight because it's what we are." Kalen held her gaze. The revenants had saved the galaxy, but they had not done it for peace. They had done it because war was all they knew, and now they were asking him to decide. Stay with the coalition, pretend that peace had truly arrived, or step into the void, where the next war waited. He had his answer before he even spoke.